This podcast is sponsored by the Fargo-Moorhead West Fargo Chamber of Commerce. The Chamber is a catalyst for growth and prosperity and is here to protect and promote business, inspire innovation, cultivate communities, and influence action. Learn more at fmwfchamber.com.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another edition of the InForum Business Beat podcast. This is your host, Thomas Evanella. This week, I've got a quick news rundown for you. After that, I'll be joined by my fellow reporter, Helmut Schmidt, for a roundup of all the latest restaurant news from the metro area. With all that said, let's get things started. A replacement for Maine Liquors along Main Avenue in Fargo is nearing completion. Siamese Bottle Shop is hoping to open at 3838 Main Avenue on November 1st. The building had previously been the Four Seasons Chinese Buffet. President of Simonson Station Stores, Arch Simonson, said the building had been renovated inside and out to be more customer-friendly. Parking, store amenities, and selection will all be improved, he said. Sky Zone Indoor Trampoline Park in Fargo is under new ownership, and changes are on the horizon. John Sawhill, the owner of Sky Zone Franchising Group and a resident of Des Moines, Iowa, purchased the location in early September. Sawhill has recently acquired other Sky Zone locations, including one in Kansas City. When asked about the sale, previous owner Bruce Carvold said he and his partners just decided the time was right to sell. Sawhill is promising more attractions for Sky Zone, though he cautioned that his new changes will take some time to debut. Golf simulators have popped up all across the Fargo-Moorhead area in recent years with one common theme. They are all located south of Interstate 94. That is going to change when neighbors Dan Bergerson and David Piper open Dog Lake North in North Fargo's Northport Plaza. Dog Lake North will feature 4 spacious bays with 4K projectors, which Bergerson and Piper said will be a key differentiating factor for their business. The simulator will cater to both casual and serious golfers and feature both food and beverage service. Both North Fargo residents themselves, Bergerson and Piper, expressed excitement about the possibility of bringing simulation golfing to their neck of the woods. It'll be something of a gift for Northside golfers as well, as the two are hoping to have Dog Lake North up and running in time for Christmas. Interstate Shoes and Repair in Moorhead is looking for a buyer to come in and take over the business. Co-owners Diane and Chubb Olson said the reason they're selling the shoe repair business is to spend more time with their grandchildren. The Olsons are seeking $150,000 for the business, though they're open to offers. Buyer or not, Interstate Shoes plans to close at the end of October. As promised, I'll be joined by Helmut Schmidt for a roundup of all of our local restaurant news. There's been so much to talk about lately that honestly it's been hard to keep up. That's why we'll give you a look back at what happened this summer and what you can look forward to as well. And joining me here on the InForum Business Beat podcast is my fellow reporter Helmut Schmidt. If you know anything about Helmut, it's that he covers most, if not all, of our restaurant and food news. So if you need to know something about restaurants in the Fargo-Moorhead area, Helmut is your guy. So Helmut, thank you for joining us.
Hey, thanks for having me.
So Helmut, give us a little bit of a rundown of what you've been tracking over the past month or so. I feel like we've had quite a bit. It's honestly been tough to keep up with.
It has. There's been a lot going on. Let's start with the openings. Start with the good news. In early September, Soul Foods opened up in the former Cajun Cafe spot, and the owner is Patricia So. She serves up Liberian food, and that's from her native land, and this is her first restaurant. Late last week, Nova Eatery, which we've been waiting on a long time, began serving at Fargo Brewing Company, just on the north side of downtown Fargo. This is a food truck-style restaurant, but it's permanently located in a converted shipping container, and that may sound strange, but it actually fits in with the look of the building. And it is under the stewardship of executive chef Ryan Nitschke and Nikki Berglund, who both own Luna Fargo and Salav Kitchen in Moorhead. Now, the sad news. Around the start of September, we found out the Dairy Queen in the shops at Osgood had closed. That restaurant had been run in a receiver arrangementship for the last couple of years, and it just failed to find a buyer. So rather than renew the lease, the company acting as the receiver, they just decided to close it. Johnny Carino's, that's a very popular restaurant, or had been in South Fargo, closed in mid-September. And then in Johnny Carino's in Bismarck, closed at the end of the month. Both of those were owned by a Sioux Falls company, and that closings there were blamed on the inability to find enough help. There was also the closing of Everett Tikka House on the northeast side of Moorhead Center Mall, and that was known for its Indian and Nepali cuisine. And the most recent closure has been, that announcement was for CJ's Kitchen on South University Drive in Fargo. It is supposed to be closing its doors in mid-October. One of the owners told me that she just couldn't find another spot the right size and at the right rent. It's a small mom and pop restaurant. And just as a side note to that, the block that CJ's is on is being eyed for redevelopment as a large commercial, retail, and apartment complex. So that's for the last month or so.
That's a lot. And the CJ's news is the latest news that we had on InForum.com. That was really a bummer, I think, for the both of us. So, we are both breakfast aficionados, so seeing a breakfast place close in Fargo is just always not ideal.
Oh, I agree. And, COVID and supply chain, all that's been hard, particularly on the mom and pop restaurants. I'm really hoping that the owners of CJ's give it another shot, that they get a place that they can do their business at again, and that people are able to enjoy their food once again.
And Helmut, it's been a couple months since you and I have done a restaurant roundup, probably since around the beginning of the summer. Why don't you take us through some of the highlights that you've seen, the good and the bad, the openings and the closings?
Okay. All right. Yeah, you're right. It's been a busy summer. We left this off at the end of May, so there was a good start to June. That was the opening of Boss's Pizza and Chicken on Broadway in downtown Fargo. That officially opened June 7th. And it runs some really late night, early morning hours with delivery to boot. We're talking 3 a.m. to 4 a.m., which is perfect for night owls, the post-bar rush crowd, college students pulling all-nighters, you name it. The Pizza Project of Traditions in West Fargo also opened in June. Its opening was delayed for more than half a year, thanks to supply chain problems. In mid-August, Moorhead got another Starbucks on Highway 10 on the east side of town. And for anybody that loves their coffee, that was watched really closely. In mid-July, Slim Chickens opened in South Fargo on 30th Avenue South, and that fronts 45th Street South. And that's a fast service restaurant that focuses, of course, on chicken. So you might want to check that one out.
Sorry, I do have to say, I know you couldn't resist, Helmut, and I do have to say I have been there a few times. I did quite enjoy it both times.
Okay. Now, the Backyard Grilling Company opened up in mid-August in the Moorhead American Legion, and it's the spot that had been vacated early in the year by Jay's Smoke and Barbecue. Another mid-August opening was El Vaquero's Taqueria and Mexican Restaurant. They had closed in 2019 and then reopened in the same spot. That's 3001 13th Avenue South in Fargo. They get good reviews on their food, too.
There has been some bad news as well, unfortunately, since the beginning of the summer.
Yeah. In mid-June, we had Buffalo Wings and Rings in West Fargo closed. They had called it quits after 3 years. The Breezeway Cafe and the entry of the the Fargo Public Library System's downtown main branch. It had been open about a decade, but the library spokesman said that it hadn't been making a lot of money lately. Now, that spot has potential to reopen. It's being studied. Perhaps after the first of the year, you might see requests for proposals on that. In early September, La Fiesta, a Mexican restaurant near West Acres, closed, and the owner decided he just didn't want to renew the lease. The positive there is that same owner plans on opening a second Casa Mexico in the spot that had been vacated by Moe's Southwest Grill. That's something you had covered, that closure earlier in the year.
And the one out of all of these that really stands out to me from this past summer is El Vaquero's. I couldn't even imagine thinking in 2019 that you're just going to close for a couple months and then to come all the way back to this year and now finally reopen. That has to stand out to you as well.
Oh, that's amazing. I can't remember the last time I'd heard something like that, especially in the same spot. but they have confidence in the location. Road work there is about done. And they serve good food. It's you look online, they get people love them. They're getting good reviews.
We had one last restaurant that I feel like was worth mentioning here as well, and that was Thai Orchid in the Moorhead Center Mall. That was one that was close to being on our list of sad news, but it's not. And why don't you tell us about that?
Well, that is amazing. They got hit really hard by construction on Center Avenue. Center Avenue was being completely refurbished, and they're in that corner of Center Mall, and they rely heavily on people being able to drive in, use the parking lot there, and business just fell off a cliff. Their place was empty, and they decided to show a couple of pictures of that online and said, "Please come back to us. We need your help. We'd like to stay open." And Moorhead and the rest of the area responded. They filled that little restaurant, and they managed to help keep it open. I am so glad for them.
And I know sometimes the restaurant news will catch a lot of us in the newsroom by surprise. Maybe we hadn't seen something coming, but you have a couple things on your radar that are coming in the next couple months. Why don't you tell us about that as well?
Okay. Well, this hungry German is keeping an eye on the Blarney Stone at the Hotel Donaldson. That is now expected to open in late November. They had originally thought they were going to open at the end of October, but of course, they got hit by supply chain delays. Some equipment just hasn't been arriving. In the meantime, that Hotel Donaldson itself is being completely revamped. About half the rooms are done now. They're working on the other half. There's also Drecker's Brewhalle. For those driving by on First Avenue North, you'll see a huge building going up there. It's a hotel, condo, conference center, and market space combination. Sort of the Swiss Army knife of retail and food and everything. The owners had hoped to open that late this year, and it's starting to look like it'll open early in the new year. And that opening may be phased, perhaps with a market space opening first.
And you hit on these a little bit earlier, but tell me, Helmut, what do you see as the common themes that are coming up when you talk to restaurant owners about their closings? I think I have a good idea of what this is, but what have you been hearing?
Primarily, it's the inability to find enough workers to keep enough hours going at their restaurants. And of course, once you find the workers, you have to train them and you have to retain them. And of course, in this current climate, you can't really blame anyone for wanting to earn more money for their time. If someone finds another job for $2 an hour more, you might lose somebody. And restaurants are struggling with this. And just like people with apartments that may find their rent getting raised, and then suddenly they have to find a new place to live, some restaurants are being approached by landlords who say, "Hey, I've taken a hit for the last couple of years. I need to raise your rent." And if their business isn't doing super well, if it's still bouncing back from COVID, maybe they have to say no. Of course, supply chain plays an issue too. If you're not getting the food in that you need, I know of at least one restaurateur that just decided to close up one concept and change over to another that he figured that he'd be able to supply better in the current conditions.
And that has been our on-staff restaurant reporter, Helmut Schmidt. If there's food news in Fargo, you know that Helmut's going to hear about it, and you can find all of it on inforum.com/business. Helmut, thank you so much for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Joining us today on this episode of the InForum Business Beat podcast is Nick Phillips, Executive Vice President of Hosting Operations for Applied Blockchain. Nick, thanks for taking some time to be here today.
Yeah, thanks a lot for having me, Thomas.
Yeah, absolutely. And so just to get started, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us about Applied Blockchain and what your company does.
Sure, absolutely. So I'm Nick Phillips. As you mentioned, I'm the EVP of Hosting Operations and also Public Affairs. So I get to work with local communities, utilities, state and federal government to kind of pull these projects together from the ground up. I've got a pretty technical background. I've been programming since I was about 10. I've owned and operated a lot of different businesses in lots of different sectors, print shop, IT programming, an ISP, data center, various things like that. And back in 2017, I got into building these types of facilities for really the first very large facilities in North America for blockchain and cryptocurrency. But applied digital, we're blockchain, which is a high power compute application. It's one of them, and we'll have some other types of facilities coming up here for artificial intelligence, machine learning, neural networks, gene sequencing, things like that.
And you've been up and running here in Jamestown, North Dakota for how long now?
So we broke ground in Jamestown, North Dakota, September 14th of last year. We started turning on the first of our equipment January 30th of this year, so just a few months. We had a pretty rough winter of construction, probably one of the worst winters in at least a few years, it sounds like. But yeah, so we've been operating a bit since January 30th, and we were at 100 megawatts, which is the full site size of the site in Jamestown by mid-year.
And how have things been going out in Jamestown then, since you've kind of gotten to that full capacity?
Good. Yeah, we really enjoyed our time in North Dakota. Everybody we hired at the facility there, except for I believe 2, came from living already within about 20 minutes of the site. So not a big transition for our folks who work in North Dakota. And we've really gotten to know the state and the area and work with people. And it just blows my mind every time I go up there, especially during the winter, how hard people are working and what they're willing to do to get jobs done for us. And it's really been a very positive experience. And the community, Jamestown, has really, brought a lot of things together with us. We did some work with the University of Jamestown. We got involved with some sports events and our breast cancer run and other things. So it's been very very engaged community and very interested in participating with what we're doing.
So what does sort of a day inside the Jamestown facility look like then?
Yeah, absolutely. So I guess before I get into that, it would be beneficial for your listeners to understand what's the facility kind of look like. People hear like data center or blockchain or high power compute, and they don't know what that means. So you can really just think of our buildings as they're long, skinny buildings. They're steel prefabricated buildings. They kind of look like a turkey barn. So they're just long, skinny buildings. The long sides on both sides are just open. We have ways of closing them either with dampers or these roll up wind screens, depending on the side of the building. And we just pull ambient air right through the building. So that all said, we have 8 data center buildings in Jamestown. We have an office. We've got a workshop and some storage, fire pump house. So we've got, call it 70,000 or so square feet of building space.
So are there like rows and rows of like servers and computers and things like that? Because I'm guessing that's what a lot of people have in mind when they think of something like this. Is that what it really looks like inside?
Yeah, so on the inside, so I described those long skinny buildings, right? So there's actually just one row in each of the buildings, but that row is 20 foot tall, right? So it's just a wall of these little computer like devices. The miners themselves are just like these little, devices with fans on them and processors inside of them. They're called ASICs. But so yeah, it's just a long wall of these devices, 20 feet tall by 300 feet long, sort of a thing. Lots of blinking lights, lots of fans, spinning all the time.
So obviously things are going fairly well for you out in Jamestown, here in North Dakota in general. Otherwise you wouldn't be expanding. You're expanding into Ellendale. Tell us about the move into Ellendale and why you decided it was the right fit.
Yeah, so Ellendale will be almost twice as large as Jamestown. And Ellendale is, it's a little more rural. It's a smaller town. There is also a college there. But the main thing that we look for is these imbalances in the power grid. The biggest thing that we need to find is electricity, right? The capacity to serve our energy needs. And that's not just sitting around everywhere. Like I can't just say, hey, I want to go build a facility in Minot, or hey, I'm just going to go build a facility in Williston or Fargo or somewhere. You have to do all this work to figure out where there's opportunity. And to us, the opportunity is where there's imbalances in the electrical system. And what do I mean by that? So in the case of the area surrounding Ellendale, there's a lot of wind farms generating a lot of electricity, but there's not enough transmission lines to export that electricity, that energy from that area to other areas. And so what ends up happening is some company will come in and build, say, 100 megawatt wind farm or gigawatt wind farm or something. Nothing that's not specific to the area, but they'll build something, and the wind will blow. And if there's too much energy being produced, then what they do is they curtail those facilities. So they actually stop generating electricity. And when they stop generating electricity, there's revenue that's not going to the local communities or the state from that. There's, of course, revenue not going to the companies who have built these facilities from that. So in the case of Ellendale, there's what's called congestion, where there's more energy being produced than there's the ability to export out of that area. And so by us building this facility in Ellendale, we will reduce the congestion in the area, which means that these wind farms can perform better. They'll be able to generate electricity, more often, and it'll have a positive, revenue impact also to the local communities.
So the facility itself in Ellendale, that's going to be bigger than Jamestown. Is it going to be doing pretty similar computing tasks then?
It's almost twice the size of Jamestown in terms of compute overall, and it will be very similar to Jamestown in all ways. Yeah, the buildings are very similar. There's a few, adjustments we found as we've now been in North Dakota for a little bit over a year. We've learned a little bit more about the environment and how it's going to work. So we've adjusted things, but yes, the site's almost exactly the same.
Saying you've learned a little bit more about the environment, is that kind of your nice way of saying that it's really cold here?
When I showed up in January, February of this past winter, and it's negative 30 and there's 50-mile-an-hour winds, I was literally blown away. Sliding down the ice, but also I was just blown away by the workers who were out there, every day, just really working hard and getting stuff done despite that. I did see our general contractor walking around in a sweater vest and tennis shoes when it was way too cold out. So pretty tough bunch up in North Dakota, living there. So yes, that's part of it, but there's also some of the storms that come through, lightning and thunder and hail just kind of blows right through suddenly, and you kind of have to deal with that. So it is a different environment. I live down in the south, and it's certainly much more warm, and I'm not used to those environments. But I did figure out that after being there when it's negative 20 and I come home and it's only 30 Fahrenheit, I could walk around outside with just a t-shirt on and be totally comfortable. So I've definitely the last year has been a pretty good initiation into North Dakota.
Yeah, you are hardier for it now, aren't you?
Yep. But our people who are up there, they've grown up in North Dakota. Many of them, they've been there for many generations, and so they're used to it. And that's what we like. We like to get into communities and work with the folks who are already there and really build a long-term, lasting relationship.
So you just transitioned into my next question perfectly, actually. So you mentioned the staffing in Jamestown. What are you expecting employment-wise down in Ellendale?
So Ellendale will be approximately 30, plus or minus a few. It kind of depends on who we find and what we need there, but right around 30 people.
Okay. And I think this is the question that's sort of swirling around up here the most is how does a high-tech company from Texas decide it wants to start doing business in North Dakota anyway? Take us back to when this all started.
Yeah, absolutely. So Our EVP of power was looking for locations for quite some time. Ended up connecting with the power company in North Dakota for Jamestown and chatted with them and had some back and forth. And it was, for him, that was before he was even working for us. It was a long time period to try to figure out, hey, North Dakota is a net exporter of energy. And when energy leaves the state, there's not sales tax revenue that goes along with that to the state. And so for North Dakota would much rather see the energy generated in the state be used in state. Means more jobs, it means the sales tax revenue, it means all sorts of things to the communities. So he spent some time chatting with them. I mentioned before that I've been building facilities like this since 2017, or that's when I started anyway. And we look to find places where we can operate with ambient air temperatures and not have to run air conditioning or other types of cooling like swamp coolers and use a lot of water, things like that. And of course, North Dakota is much cooler than Texas. So the percentage of the year that we can run with no cooling is very, very high. It's almost the entire year. There's just some peak days in the summer where, it can get into the upper 90s or maybe even low hundreds. So North Dakota from a weather standpoint is great. From a regulatory standpoint, it's been really fantastic to work with all the folks we've met in North Dakota. Mostly the attitude is, how can we do more business? How can we attract more people into the state? There's certainly some states that's not their position. So that's been great for North Dakota. I mentioned the capacity for electricity. Is that's first and foremost, right? So there was capacity in Jamestown for us, and then you just add all these other things on, and it starts to make a lot of sense. We just had such a great experience in North Dakota that we thought we'd like to do it again.
So North Dakota is such an agricultural state, but what you're saying is maybe the weather means that North Dakota could become a high-tech state.
There's a lot of great benefits for technology in North Dakota. Absolutely. And
then one last thing for you, Nick. What do you foresee as the future for your company, be it here in North Dakota or elsewhere?
Yeah. So these facilities are, long life type of facilities. We expect them to last 20, 30 plus years. The facilities themselves, we're an infrastructure company. So whatever the technology is in the building, it matters to us because we have to help manage it and take care of it and keep it running and operating. But whatever the technology is, however it changes, we'll continue to, move along with that as things progress. But the facilities themselves, we expect to last for decades. So we'll continue to maintain and operate those, and hopefully we'll be able to expand some more in North Dakota. As a company, we're continuing to expand also in other states. We've got another facility under construction now. We've got other locations in states we're doing due diligence in to try to find more places to build facilities. Of course, we want some geographic diversity. But yeah, it's definitely a long-term thing where we're looking to just get these things up and running and work with the folks who are going to operate them. You mentioned it's an agricultural state, right? So there's not a ton of folks who have, very high level, technical experience. There's some definitely, but that's not, Jamestown, North Dakota hasn't been historically a tech center, right? So we've come up with training programs, and I think that as we train more and more folks, it can attract other people, to the area. You kind of build this community. Where I live, we have a very technical, community in the downtown area. And it's really kind of over the last 20 years, just kind of burgeoned and grown into something pretty special. And I think something like that could happen there as well.
And once again, that was Nick Phillips, Executive Vice President of Hosting Operations and Public Affairs for Applied Blockchain. Nick, thanks again so much for sharing the story with us.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me.
And that's going to wrap up this week's episode of the InForum Business Beat podcast. This has been your host, Thomas Evanella. Keep it locked on inforum.com/business for all the latest headlines.